It's a good idea to set your view to gallery mode, which can be found in the top right-hand corner for people who haven't been using Zoom a lot. Reminder to stay on mute, and of course always be respectful of speakers and each other so that we can have a really good open and constructive discussion. We'll hear from the speakers shortly, but obviously we're trying to maximise time for the question and answers. So when the time comes, please raise your hand and we'll invite you to join the discussion. We've had really great questions submitted already, so we're going to open the Q&A session with those when the time comes, so thanks for submitting those. Another good function too is to submit your comments using the actual chat function, because that helps us keep a log of who's got active questions, and then we'll invite you to read your questions out at any point in time too. We've got 4 main speakers. Can I please introduce Shaun de Bruyn, Chief Executive of TiCSA, Gina Norman to my right, the RAA General Manager of Travel and Distribution, the Honourable Leon Bignell MP, who's your member for Mawson and a member of the Labor Party, and Ms Amy Williams, who is the Liberal candidate for Mawson. So welcome to the discussion. We also have regional tourism managers joining today. So Dylan Beach, the Fleurieu Peninsula Regional Tourism Manager, who's I think in the room with you there as well, and Megan Harvey, who's joining on the line, who's the Regional Tourism Manager for the beautiful Kangaroo Island. Welcome to you all. Also, we have Charles Mountain from our team is available to take technical questions. He's our Senior Manager of Road Safety and Infrastructure at RAA. You will have seen him and heard him all over the media, regularly talking about road safety issues. So if we need him, we can access his expertise if we've got questions, given the strong connection between roads and tourism, and particularly in the area of Mawson. We know that we may get some technical questions in that regard as well. So with that, I'll hand over to Shaun. I'll introduce him as our first speaker, the CEO of TiCSA. Very familiar face, can't see him quite as close up as you might otherwise. Deep and varied tourism experience, particularly in relationship management, business planning, destination and experience development, which I expect we'll get questions on as well. Over 20 years in the industry. So the role of TiCSA is to advocate for you and the 1,000+ members in the wider South Australian tourism industry to strengthen your businesses, the regions, and obviously to grow the visitor economy. So please welcome Shaun to kick us off.
Thanks very much, Emily. Great to be here today, and thank you to Leon and Amy for joining us today. I've got 3 minutes. I'll start my stopwatch and I'm off. I've got a few slides and someone's going to click them through for me. I wanted to spend a minute just to quickly set the scene, and we all know that the last 2 years have been incredibly challenging for our industry, that there has been all sorts of business conditions that we've seen, and this graph demonstrates those business conditions since the bushfires back at the end of 2019. We then went into COVID and we've seen a number of shocks. Right now, this survey, this graph that we ran in January, highlights the business conditions over the last 3 months of last year, so October, November, December. We had 370 businesses respond, which is the largest response rate we've ever had, and it's a very good sample size. And that gives actual hard numbers on the business circumstances that people are facing. Just to quickly highlight a couple of those numbers, 64% of businesses said that they had seen a significant downturn in their activity over that 3-month period, 42% that they had reduced staff and they had operations. The outlook was also quite gloomy for many businesses for future investment, and the outlook for confidence being the key issue, and certainty. Just move into the next slide. We've broken that down into different segments, and you can see there that the green represents a decrease in activity for that market segment, and purple is no change, and grey is actually an increase in activity. So compared to the 3 months from the previous year being 2020, so the corresponding period. So that gives another little insight into where conditions are at. Moving forward though, and this is where TiCSA, as part of our election advocacy, we've come up with a 5-point plan based on industry consultation. And driving demand is the #1 thing that industry would like to see government consideration for. Primarily that is funding for SATC to undertake marketing activity that gets the South Australia brand out there, gets visitors to come from interstate and overseas when they're able to spend those dollars and create those jobs and sustain those businesses that we're all involved in. Infrastructure experience development is incredibly important. Business capability and workforce is an area that we believe needs more attention, and that certainly industry has been telling us that there needs to be more attention, particularly in the workshop space, the capability space for SME operators. And lastly, partnerships and collaboration. There's never been a greater time for the need of partnerships and collaboration to make sure that we are leveraging our resources to the maximum. The last one, and the last 10 seconds I want to focus on, is restart and reinvestment. This is a new area that we believe specifically needs government resource as we move out of the pandemic into recovery, that there needs to be business support to help people reinvest in their future financial success. So that's my 3 minutes. Thanks very much, Emily. Back over to you.
Thank you very much on all of those, the areas that you've highlighted. We're expecting really healthy discussion on those, particularly that skills, experience, demand and restarting. We've had great conversations so far in the other forums. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Gina Norman, who, as I said, is the General Manager of Travel and Distribution, also with more than 2 decades worth of experience in tourism, customer service and retail industries. She's an incredibly strong advocate for the industry and committed not just to the viability, but the growth of the sector. So I welcome Gina. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us again for a fabulous virtual event. Some people here today will know and be working with the REA through the travel side of the organisation, and others might be surprised to know that REA Travel is one of the longest running travel agencies in the state. We've been looking after our members and South Australians for all forms of travel for more than 60 years, and we've also been working with and supporting tourism operators just like yourselves. The last 2 years have been incredibly tough for the industry, and today is about giving you the opportunity to ask your local politicians about what supports there are for tourism in your region and what the pathway to recovery looks like for your business. At REA, we want to see the tourism sector return to the vibrant and growing sector that it's known for being. This is why we've partnered with TiCSA to amplify our voice and support tourism businesses and operators like yourselves to grow the visitor economy again in South Australia. To be travel ready, we need to make it easy and safe for people to travel around South Australia. Despite COVID-19, strong intra-state travel has meant that some regions have experienced really strong activity. However, this has revealed certain infrastructure problems in regional South Australia. That's why when the government introduced the Local Government Infrastructure Partnership Program, we really welcomed it. Now we want it to continue. We want to see the next state government commit to an ongoing regional tourism grant program to support upgrades to town centres and local infrastructure. The Mawson region is famous for having Australia's best cycling routes, and we are calling on the state to develop a state cycling strategy underpinned by a $10 million annual investment in the State Bicycle Fund that supports all regions with a particular focus on the Aldinga to Willunga cycleway. We also recognise that roads need to be safe and well maintained so people can get to the fantastic tourist destinations that you offer. This is why we're calling for a 4-year road maintenance fund with a minimum value of $600 million to be put towards transparent road maintenance funding and improved road safety, such as the Inman Valley Road. As well, in the Mawson electorate, we're advocating for the installation of additional overtaking lanes on Victor Harbour Road, Main Road in McLaren Vale and Main South Road. And as Emily mentioned, Charles Mountain is on the call today to talk to this in more detail if needed. Improving access via infrastructure is just one piece of the puzzle. Updating, repairing and extending visitor signage is a priority across all regions, as is improvements to visitor infrastructure and improved rest areas and facilities. Lastly, we know the key to the recovery of the tourism sector is a skilled workforce and an available skilled workforce. In an REA survey, operators identified recruiting and retaining staff as the #1 barrier to growing business at the moment. Lack of international workers, along with job security, housing supply, adequate training and upskilling are just some of the issues driving the growing capacity constraints. It's clear that issues driving skill shortages are multifaceted and require a whole of government response. We're calling for a state strategy with specific regional tourism employment plans to respond to growing skill shortages and to rebuild operator capacity. This is vital so that the sector can be more sustainable and resilient into the future. I know it has been and continues to be extremely tough for you as tourism operators. What has shone through is the incredible resilience of the industry and those working in it. And I really look forward to working with you and supporting you to help grow the visitor economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. It feels like we're in a newsroom here, which is probably a good segue to Hon Leon Bignell, actually. We are really looking forward to talking to that sort of moving from a COVID-ready to a travel-ready environment. So look forward to our next speaker, the Honourable Leon Bignell, member for Mawson, who's a really passionate advocate for his community and electorate. Leon has been the member for Mawson and representing the Labor Party since the 2006 election, and prior to that was a well-known ABC broadcaster and media advisor. He's actively pushed for legislation to support the agricultural region as well as the residential part of his electorate. It's a really interesting intersection, I think, in your part of the world, particularly as we look at how do we support a growing population as well as those competing interests of the travel and tourism as an important destination in South Australia. So please welcome the Honourable Leon Bignell. Over to you.
Thanks very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Great to see so many familiar faces, and I'm just going to begin by saying that we feel for so many of you who have done it so hard over the past 2 years through the bushfires on Kangaroo Island, and then of course COVID that has affected so many operators, and it's been really, really tough. I had the great pleasure and privilege of being Tourism Minister from 2013 to 2018, the last Labor Tourism Minister, where we grew, in 2013 when I took over, we had the visitor economy was worth about $3.9 billion. We set a target of $8 billion, which even people like David Ridgway, who was the opposition spokesperson at the time, said was an ambitious one. He didn't really believe that we could get there. And then, of course, he had the privilege of, when we provided that momentum, that when he was tourism minister in I think late 2018, early 2019, where we did go past that $8 billion mark by having more events in South Australia, by partnering with tourism operators around South Australia to help them grow their business, and by bringing many more international flights in. But of course, we've seen all that go in a massive nosedive since COVID, and now with an election coming up, we need to have a government that's going to get in and really work side by side with the visitor economy operators to make sure that we can get those figures back up. Because we've always said when we're in government, and it's been the mantra of Zoe as our tourism spokesperson, that tourism equals jobs. And it's one of the few sectors where you can actually get jobs right across the state. You don't need a mine, you don't need a factory in a particular location. We can grow jobs and wealth in every part of South Australia. We've got 1 million square kilometres, and we've got operators and workers out there in every part of it. So we need to be working with you to repair the damage of the past 2 years, but then to get that growth going again. And it needs money. And we've seen $24 million cut from the tourism budget in the forward estimates. And what we know, and we proved it in 2014 in our budget, that when you put money in, it's like fertiliser. You see the growth in visitor numbers, you see the growth in jobs, and so it really does need that attention. We'll bring back events like the TiCSA 500, which was cut, and there's so many other events that people don't talk about. We had a rugby league match between Melbourne Storm and Sydney Roosters each year. That's been allowed to go by the by, and so many other major events. So we'll be really working hard to give people the reason to come to South Australia, enjoy whatever it is that is the reason they get here, and then get out into our regions. And we see that as something that's really important. There's been touched on in the presentations before about infrastructure that goes around tourism. So apart from helping the tourism industry, the visitor economy directly. We've already pledged $4.2 million to upgrade 21 intersections in the McLaren Vale area. In the space of a fortnight last year, we had 2 fatal and 1 really serious injury crash here. So we're going to upgrade 21 intersections. In each one of those, it was visitors to our area, maybe not paying attention, who have had a collision at an intersection. So that 4.2 million will go towards that. We've got $3 million for a bikeway from Wollonga to Wollonga. I saw that was on the wish list, so we've already ticked that one off. We've also announced that we'll be building 3 overtaking lanes between Maiponga and Cape Jervis, not just for tourists on the Flurio, but also those going to to Kangaroo Island. In 2024, we're going to have bigger ferries operating, and we need to make sure that the extra traffic on those roads, people can overtake safely. Now, I'm out of time, but I'm sure we've got some questions later, and that's what I think is really important, is to hear what operators have to say and what you'd like us to do as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leon. I'll now like to bring Amy Williams, the Liberal candidate for Mawson, into the conversation. Amy was raised on the Flurio Peninsula, her family's home for 4 generations. She's a board member of the Hills and Flurio Landscape Board and has been in various senior leadership roles with primary industries and natural resource management sector. So please welcome Amy.
Thank you. Firstly, I was going to acknowledge the difficulties currently being experienced by a number of businesses. So I think we're all very much on the same page with that. Obviously, there have been and continue to be a number of tough balancing acts to keep South Australians safe while keeping the economy as strong as possible and supporting these businesses who've been really impacted by the pandemic, and no doubt some of you on the line are in that number. As Leon's actually mentioned, prior to COVID, South Australia's visitor economy was at a record level of 8.1 billion. And I note the target of 12.8 billion now. So there's a focus and significant work underway to exceed that pre-COVID record. And while keeping very much front of mind the difficulties being experienced and the graph that Shaun showed, just a few little green shoots to mention that have been brought to my attention. In the 12 months to June last year, SA's total visitor expenditure had come back up to 5.8 billion, which was well ahead of the South Australian Tourism Commission's forecast of 4.9 billion. Interstate expenditure, of course, has been critical in the current environment, increasing 29% to a record high of 2.6 billion. And with intrastate visitation growing 14% to 4.9 million visits, which is the 3rd highest on record. Regional visitor expenditure grew to 3.5 billion, up 25%, and nearing pre-COVID levels. And I understand the most recent airline data shows slowly improving results, with an increase for Qantas this week 13% up, mainly on trunk routes, and Qantas regional services up to 2% above pre-COVID levels. I'm well aware of the importance of working towards a good operating environment for businesses and making targeted investments into regional SA, so looking after the regions and not just metropolitan areas. A recent example of a positive step with regards to good operating environments for businesses is the exemption from payroll tax now in place for South Australian businesses with an annual taxable payroll of up to 1.5 million since the 1st of January 2019. It's really important for government to have good working relationships with industry representative bodies like TiCSA, the RAA, regional grapevine and tourism associations, and other business associations and businesses. I've seen the positive results which can be achieved by effective and engaged industry representative bodies working constructively with government. Just some of my recent roles have been as Executive Officer of Primary Producers SA and the Horticulture Coalition of SA, so I'm very familiar with family businesses, local businesses, and the importance of the operating environment. Locally, I've seen many examples of benefits from well-targeted investments in Mawson. Leon mentioned the forward estimates, but of course forward estimates, and particularly now, are just a very small part of the investment going into tourism and regions. Just a few examples of other investments outside of those portfolio forward estimates figures. Regional Growth Fund investment, Jobs and Economic Growth Fund investment, bushfire recovery support, investment in our parks system, and nature-based tourism. So look, in the short time we have available, I was going to give a bit of a rundown in the various investments coming in, but I really don't have time, unfortunately, to go into all of them. But just to list them off, obviously you're very aware of the Tourism Industry Development Fund, marketing support to regional tourism organisations, as well as the work of the SA Tourism Commission, the Great State vouchers and support to regional events. So through the SA Tourism Commission, as well as Regional Events Fund and Leisure Events Fund. So those investments within the tourism portfolio, but also we've got the Regional Growth Fund, which is a $160 million commitment over 10 years, starting in 2018-19, and includes the recently announced $10 million Opening Our Great Outdoors grant program, as well as the charter boat diversification program. And I think we've seen, when I had a quick look, there were at least $3.4 million into Mawson in at least 8 projects there. So a significant investment into regional growth. The Opening Our Great Outdoors program is just part of the investment into nature-based tourism. With the investment in parks, since 2018-19, we've had over $320 million in additional investment into the environment and water portfolios, including more than $130 million into parks since 2018-19. We've increased the ranger numbers. The ranger numbers had dropped to just over 90, and they're now back up to about 140 rangers. So significant investment going into the parks, including $52 million on Kangaroo Island, and $14.6 million for the Flinders Chase Visitor Centre as part of that. We've got significant investments into tracks and trails, including Flurio Peninsula mountain biking, hiking trails, the Hyson Trail, including the Boondaloo Ridge Walk and Day facilities already opened recently. So we've also got the recent work done on the economic value of South Australia's national parks and reserves, which showed really significant values there, and $23, I think it was, going into the economy for every $1 spent in a park, just for example. So the Jobs and Economic Growth Fund has a funding capacity of $200 million over 4 years for initiatives creating long-term sustainable jobs and economic growth. So that's another investment outside of the tourism portfolio investment. I've already mentioned bushfire support for Kangaroo Island. Of course, there's been some very significant amounts of money from both the federal and state levels going in there. Some final points to finish up on. Very much aware of workforce challenges for local businesses and also training needs. Having been a member of the Training and Skills Commission until recently, I'm particularly aware of the challenges in recruiting and retaining staff into regions, and they're not simple problems often, and obviously housing availability, particularly for Kangaroo Island. We've got a bad alignment of factors there for Kangaroo Island with regards to housing availability. So I'd love to talk more about flexible and responsive training, but I'm sure there'll be time coming up. But just final points are to reiterate an understanding of the value of tourism. I've just given some headline figures for the state, but obviously for the Flurio Peninsula and Kangaroo Island, tourism is a very much major part of the economy and the culture and the communities. And I'll just reiterate the importance of listening to and working constructively with industry bodies and other representative bodies at the various levels.
Thanks, Amy. We'll go straight to the Q&A if we like, because there's a lot of topics there for us to dig into. Reminder to start posting your questions in the chat function and use your raise hand. TiCSA are going to run the Q&A session for us. So I'm going to hand over to Christina, who's the Policy and Programs Manager for TiCSA, to kick off.
Thank you, Emily, and great to have you with us, Amy and Leon. You've covered a lot of ground in a few small minutes there. And I do encourage everyone to pop questions into the chat box. As we go along, I might ask you to take yourself off mute and ask the question yourself. But what we'll do is, we did get quite a few questions in advance, so I'm going to start with some of those, and then as new questions come up through the chat, we'll throw to some people in the crowd. Now, we've obviously only got half an hour left, so please keep responses to a couple of minutes, and I'm not afraid to use an emoji to get you to stop talking. But let's just start, Amy and Leon. You have covered a lot of ground, and you know, as an electorate, it does cover such a diverse range of opportunities and challenges from a tourism perspective. But if you could just hit on what you think are, for you, the top 3 tourism policy priorities for the Mawson electorate.
Look, I've had a look through the TiCSA document, as well as the Kangaroo Island Tourism Association document as well, and the Kangaroo Island Business and Brand Alliance. And I think it is quite challenging to identify 3 top priorities, because there are a number of specific priorities identified in those documents. And I think, as I mentioned, it's about listening to industry representatives, and I think you know, as we get opportunities to address all of those priorities, it's important to take opportunities wherever we can to address those priorities being raised by business. I will just mention, I think perhaps to provide context as much as anything, that the 3 issues most frequently are raised with me out and about in the electorate generally would have to be roads, health, and planning for the long term. So development planning to protect character, and also environmental issues. So now, obviously, roads very much aligns with a number of the priorities raised already. So we've got roads up the top. Look, I think really there's a whole heap of investment priorities that have been identified. So investment in resourcing generally needs to be identified and supported, but workforce and housing kind of simply swings in there. So really, that's some of the key ones, like roads, financial supports, and workforce and housing issues.
Yeah, great. And we'll dive into, I reckon, all 3 of those in a bit more detail too. But Leon, do you want to give us your top 3 for the electorate?
Yeah, I think in terms of just talking about the visitor economy, number 1 has got to be making sure that those great tourism operators that we have, who have remortgaged their homes or taken another job or whatever to survive the past 2 years, are given assistance to stay in the sector. We've got some world-leading people who, because we've only had intrastate people coming to the area or to KI, so either to the Fleurieu and Parabale area or to KI, that aren't doing those sort of, you know, higher end experiences. So we need to look after them and keep the very good operators that we already have going as we then grow things. Marketing is going to be huge. We're going to need a lot of money in marketing, because as Australia opens up, yeah, we think about everyone coming in from overseas, but what about the million Australians who head overseas every year? They're going to want to do that again. We're going to have South Australians who have enjoyed great holidays in the past 2 years, rediscovering their own backyard. They're going to be itchy to get interstate and overseas. So we're going to be in a competitive marketplace with 200 other countries and thousands of regions around the world. And we're going to need to make sure that we have the marketing dollars there as well. We're going to need to have major events and conventions in South Australia as well. So all of those things that we did between 2013, 2018 to grow, we need to do that again. We need to make sure that we hit it hard. You know, we just sort of see that when you put that extra money into marketing, into events, it's like fertilizer, and the whole state benefits. The visitor economy grows in every region when you do that. Marketing is key. You're out there in a busy marketplace, and if you're not telling people how great Kangaroo Island is, how great the Fleurieu Peninsula is, how great McLaren Vale is, and indeed how great South Australia is, they'll all be nicking off somewhere else.
Absolutely. Your first point about helping our wonderful existing businesses to get back on their feet and restart is a fantastic segue to TiCSA's #1 policy priority. So I'm going to give Shaun a little bit of airtime just to dive into that a bit more from what we're hearing and what we'd love to hear in terms of policy commitments from each side of politics.
Thanks, Christina, and thank you, Leon, Amy. Yes, absolutely. What we've been seeing from tourism businesses, I'm sure you're seeing it as well, and Leon, you've hit to the heart of the issue, is that if you're not targeting a self-drive South Australian, you've probably had a really tough 2 years, and you're fighting for survival. And ultimately, those businesses that are fighting for their survival, a lot of them are tour operators. The CBD has been well documented, but also event organisers as well. They have potentially lost good staff. They have potentially sold down or sold off infrastructure, and any cash reserves they had are long gone, and they're probably in a significant level of debt. For those businesses to reinvest in their recovery, they actually need some support. They don't have the capacity to financially stump up for the marketing activity, to stump up to get the right staff in place with the right skills, to stump up to renew and refresh and potentially replace infrastructure. But they have great skills. They have great, potentially international networks through the trade distribution system, and with a little bit of support from government, a hand up, not a hand out, they will get going and they will set their course and they will be successful for many years to come. But their capacity to invest, fully invest, and to provide the dollars that they will need for that recovery at 100 miles an hour, they are diminished. They aren't able to do that. And so consequently, from a TiCSA point of view, from an industry point of view, we very much need our future government to provide those hand-ups to those operators who are prepared to invest in the future of their business success and ultimately our state's tourism success.
Thanks, Shaun. Another topic or area that's come up a lot, particularly in questions from people who have come on board, is around employment and the struggles at the moment for retaining and attracting the right staff. So I'd like to, this is sort of a two-part question. First, I'd love to get Gina to be able to share what RAA Travel does in terms of destination development and where that assistance can come from. But then also Amy and Leon to dive a bit more into that skills and employment and retention challenge that we're really facing, that is a big hurdle for the industry's growth and recovery at the moment. So Gina, I'll hand to you first.
Thanks. Yeah, we know it's actually really difficult to juggle everything required to focus on the distribution of travel for people, and we have been supporting operators by providing a very low cost model of distribution where we have our own platform that any local operator can join. It doesn't cost anything to join, and we can house your product, your destination, your experience, and then our members have access to that. So our members and all South Australians can book through that platform, which does direct distribution for you. And then you can spend your time and energy on training your staff and developing your people, but you're not spending your time and energy on having to worry about how you're going to distribute your product or how you're going to access our 780,000 members in the rest of South Australia in the easiest possible way. And it's incredibly cost effective for you as well, far more so than any of the other distribution channels.
That's great. Thanks, Gina. And so Leon and Amy, really interested to hear your thoughts and ideas on how at a regional level that we can overcome some of these challenges of staff attraction in the short term and maybe some innovative solutions, and then what needs to be done in terms of the long term to make sure tourism is a great career opportunity for the next generation coming through.
Should we swap backwards and forwards?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're a little distracted. There's a big glass window here and two parrots were just having a fight. So I wasn't looking away.
Stay focused, Leon, focus.
I was like this at school. I was always looking out the window at the planes. But I was paying attention, just in case you're going to give me detention or something like that. Look, I think skills, particularly in regional areas, is a real big issue that isn't going to be solved by either side of Parliament. It's going to be solved by everyone working together, and that is both sides of Parliament. It's going to be Regional Development Australia. I know it's done a lot of work in South Australia on this. And I read the Washington Post a fair bit and the Times in London, and this isn't a particularly South Australian phenomenon. We've seen people right around the world just who were on the treadmill, working in their job day in, day out. COVID comes along, they're on JobKeeper or JobSeeker in the Australian experience. They decide, hang on, I don't want to get back on that treadmill anymore. So A, we've got to deal with the psychology of how we get people back to work. B, we've lost the backpacker market. So we've lost all of those workers that were doing the job that Aussies didn't want to do before, or these people supplemented them. So we need to, once we open up, make sure that we get those people back out into the regions. And that's going to take some levers at the federal and state level to encourage people to get out there. And then if you look at places like Kangaroo Island, housing, even before the bushfires, we only had about 3 houses available for rent to tenants at any given time. So that hasn't got any better since the loss of 89 homes through the bushfires. And while we've got a lot of homes that are on Airbnb or they're rentals on stays or wherever, we really do need to solve that issue as well. And how do we do that? Is something that I don't necessarily have the answer to, but we all need to work on how that's going to happen. And if we get into government, I'm sure that's going to be something that's going to be a focus of our regional minister, our tourism minister, agriculture minister, housing minister, and treasurer in how we actually get the houses in place, and then how we attract, train, and deploy people in the workforce who operators are screaming out for.
It was definitely a question that's come through loud and clear as well. So I'm sure the tourism industry would love to be engaged in those discussions too. Amy.
Thanks, Christina. So there's four key points I think I'd like to touch on. The first one you may have heard, I believe the federal government has flagged an intention to open international borders around Easter. And of course that could be a game changer in terms of movement of people more freely. Obviously we've had some workers coming from the Pacific Islands. So that has been possible. Where there's a will, there's a way. But that potential opening of the borders could really be a game changer. And I think the tourism sector has some similarities to agribusiness, which I'm very familiar with, which has a lot of international workers. Quite interesting, when I was on the Training and Skills Commission and chaired the Agribusiness Industry Skills Council, one thing that became very apparent is we didn't have a good handle on the number of overseas workers. That the figures don't track it very well, and so it's something that I think COVID has really forced us to try and get a better handle on what, exactly how many people we do have and where they are. Etc. Second thing is obviously one of the key factors is housing for the workers, and particularly on Kangaroo Island we've got a very bad combination of factors with the recovery from the bushfires and all the rebuild there and the shortage of tradies, etc. Not to mention even getting into materials and things like that. So the RDA has done a residential accommodation study, and I've been working on this, and I think I saw Sue was on the line here, and that follows on work done by the Kangaroo Island Commissioner. So there's a number of things that have been put forward, including a pilot project, etc. So I think to echo some of Leon's comments, some of these are wicked problems without simple solutions, but I think we have invested in, for example, worker accommodation at Pandana, and also there's been an investment at the western end of Kangaroo Island, but I'm very mindful there's a couple of levels of accommodation needs. There's your basic short-term accommodation, but also your higher level accommodation for workers and families who are there for the long haul, etc. So complex problem for a much longer time. And it's not always just the obvious things like housing and attracting people to regions. If people are coming with families, then, you know, job opportunities for partners, education, sporting opportunities for children, all these things can be factors, particularly in retention as well as attraction of workers. We haven't really mentioned training very much. We need responsive and flexible training supported. There's a significant budget from both federal and state governments into vocational education and training, and we've got to make that work for sectors. So we've got to make sure that the training which is being delivered is what's needed, and so that really comes back to that engagement of industry bodies and businesses we talked about before. So traineeships and apprenticeships have been a big focus of the current budget, and one of the things the Training Commission looked at when I was a member was making sure there's some flexibility there, so that, you know, we've got flexibility for things like higher level apprenticeships, and just more flexibility generally, to make sure that significant investment into training is matching the needs. And I haven't even really touched on some of the other issues like seasonality of work opportunities and trying to match together, you know, where to pull together round the year work, for example, if you've got seasonal opportunities, things like that. But I think, you know, I think groups like the RDAs and industry bodies, I think also have a real role to play in that type of coordination. But yeah, not an easy or short answer.
No, but you've another great segue in terms of industry association and where we sit and some of our insights around not just training, but what we talk about is business capability. And Shaun, did you want to just touch on a bit more around what we're pushing for in terms of being able to assist the workers and the owners of existing businesses with their own capabilities?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. So just quickly, really what we see from industry is there's three issues when it comes to workforce and capability. There's a careers piece around, you know, schools, and you know, we need tourism and hospitality to be desirable. It's not a desirable industry sector at the moment, given the challenges it's been through. We need it to be more desirable, and we need kids to want to get into tourism and hospitality. So there needs to be some work done there. There's a skills piece in the middle that's been talked about, and there's been a lot of work done by a lot of governments on traineeships and apprenticeships, and the current government's doing a lot of work in that space. The other piece, though, that we believe needs more focus is this capability piece. The vast majority of tourism businesses are SME family businesses. We know from ABS data that 95% of tourism businesses in SA have 20 FTEs or less, and actually about 80% have 4 FTEs or less in terms of business size. And those businesses aren't necessarily engaged in apprenticeships or traineeship form of training. What they want is they want capability. So we really think future government needs to invest in that capability space more strongly. And what that looks like is workshops. And what we find is that business SME operators will go to a workshop. They can give up 2 or 3 or 4 hours to go to a workshop. They learn something that's relevant. They can then implement that into their business that afternoon or the next day or the next week. And that has an immediate impact in terms of their financial sustainability and their capacity to contribute more positively to tourism across the state. That's 3 elements. It's careers, it's capability.
Thanks, Shaun. So yes, definitely skills and workforce capability that is an area that both TiCSA and REA are advocating for in terms of the upcoming election. And one of the other areas that we've heard a lot about and that we're both advocating for is around investment in infrastructure. And I'd like to come back to particularly road infrastructure and just get Charles Mountain at REA just to elaborate a bit more on what your research has said about the region and what REA is advocating for, and then again come back to Amy and Leon to provide their comments and any commitments going forward.
Thanks, Christina. We did a pretty comprehensive study of the Fleurieu region a little while ago. In fact, that was released towards the end of last year. And it'll come as no surprise that the key issues really are Victor Harbour Road, Main South Road, an ongoing investment to that, particularly down to Cape Jarvis, and probably more particularly around the McLaren Vale area. So it was very heartening to hear about the commitment to upgrade the numerous intersections through the McLaren Vale area, because that was one of the big points of that came out during our study. But certainly ongoing investment in Victor Harbour Road is really seen as critical, as is Main South Road. So obviously the projects which are on the book at the moment, the duplication and the 2+1, but beyond that, going beyond Selix, we need to look at what happens all the way down to Cape Jarvis. So things such as additional overtaking lanes, shoulder sealing, roadside hazard reduction, intersection upgrades, and probably critically also looking at the study for better freight connectivity between Cape Jarvis and the Southeastern Freeway, which we know presents a number of challenges to deliver. But these are all key parts of ensuring the region can operate and provide the good experience for the people who live there, people travelling down there, but because importantly, the seamless movement of freight and commodities through the region as well.
Thanks, Charles. Amy, I'll open the floor to your comments.
Yeah, where to start? Because as I mentioned, roads is probably the most frequently raised issue for me. So I mean, the obvious starting point is the $560 million Fluoro Connections project, which will be duplicating to McLaren Vale and also to Aldinga with 3 lanes, then going up to Selix. There have been a couple of consultation periods on that with community information sessions, etc., which I've been fairly involved in, and you know, helping to make sure that some of the key stakeholders are connecting in with the project team there. And I think we've had a couple of good outcomes in terms of an overpass at Tatachilla Road and an underpass replacing the Aldinga roundabout. But yeah, it's certainly a very high priority for me, roads generally, and very much aware of some of the issues Leon's mentioned as well, in terms of, you know, safety and congestion issues as well. I've got the RAA's regional road assessment. Unfortunately, it's early days in the campaign, so that's probably as much as I can really comment on that. Is that, you know, I also drive these, probably Leon and I both regularly drive these roads.
We won't be sure.
I was going to say, we see each other on the roads, we can't really miss each other's cars. I've shredded one set of tyres already, but yeah, so I think I've popped up over 30,000 kilometres since the start of June. So I think we're both very familiar with the road issues. Also, I'm aware of the Southern LGA transport plan, and yeah, some of those freight route issues, heavy vehicle access, etc. Having previously worked for Primary Producers SA as well as the Horticulture Coalition, I've been on their transport and supply chain committee. So I'm fairly familiar with a number of those issues and the needs. But yeah, that's probably the starting point. And over.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, and thanks, Charles, for your outline. So in 2017, in our budget, in our mid-year budget review, we put $435 million in to duplicate Main South Road from Seaford to Selix, and we've been disappointed that nearly 4 years later, and 5 years later, that we haven't seen any construction work start on that, and it's actually been scaled back with the Aldinga to Selix bit being 2 lanes in one direction, 1 lane in the other direction. We think, like the Southern Expressway, if you're going to do something, do it properly the first time around. But as I've mentioned before, we're investing that $4.2 million to upgrade those 21 intersections that are perfectly good for all of us locals who know where they are, but people getting around, unfamiliar, having a good time with the people in the car, maybe they've been to a cellar door, and not that you would say people should, you know, have any alcohol in their system and drive, but they are allowed to have one, or, you know, 2, as long as they stay under 0.05. So all those factors can contribute to a more dangerous road. So we are working with the Untitled Council to make signage around those intersections much better, so that people can't help but notice that they're there. And I think as Amy and I travel up and down Main South Road all the way down to Cape Jarvis, as regularly as we do, there are very few opportunities to overtake. There are a couple of overtaking lanes between Maibonga and Cape, but they're so short, it's really hard. And sometimes that just increases the frustration. It increases the danger as people so we want to get in and build 3 new overtaking lanes between Waiponga and Cape Jervis, as I mentioned. Bigger vessels in 2024 for Sealink. There's going to be more road traffic on there, which includes tourist buses and includes heavy freight. So, and tourists, hopefully by then, or surely by then, international visitors, and we've all been stuck behind them. They're having a great time, but they're on the wrong side of the road in an unusual car, and we have to give them a little bit of space as well and respect that they're not going to go at the same speeds we are, and they're not going to drive to the conditions that we grew up around. So I'll probably leave it there. I think we've covered the road stuff before.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And, you know, these are complex problems. No one solution to it all. I'm going to ask one more question from the audience before starting to wrap up. But it's around interstate flights and getting direct flights into Kangaroo Island. Any thoughts on how, if you're in government, how you might help to achieve that?
Who's you?
Well, I can start with a fairly quick answer on this one. I imagine, you know, that issue would largely be demand driven, of course. So we're very much talking demand, confidence, borders, etc., border openings, etc. But certainly, that would be. I saw that, I think, on the on some of the KI priorities, and so it'll be an issue I'd be willing to take up, no doubt.
Great.
Obviously, it's been hard for whoever was in government for the last 2 years with state borders being closed. But when we were in government, we did have those interstate flights coming in via Qantas, and what we did was we didn't give them money to do it. We gave them marketing dollars to get behind, to fill the seats and everything else, to make it a route that Qantas would promote. And we did the same thing with Rex. We gave them extra money as well, so that we didn't disadvantage the existing airline on that route.
Great. Last chance if anyone wants to put their hand up and ask a question.
I saw one there about
Fraser from Backyard Universe asked about the overtaking lane coming off the boat.
Yeah, so I agree. That's a real problem, that one from Cape Jervis as you go up the hill. And that would probably, look, without saying where they're going to be, because we want to get in, we've got the money allocated, get in and talk to the community and to operators and everyone else about it. But that is almost a no-brainer, because people come off the ferry, you've got the overseas tourists, unfamiliar with road conditions, their car, wrong side of the road, wrong side of the car. You've got heavy freight vehicles who struggle up that hill. So an overtaking lane there, up the hill, would almost allow everyone to sort out their rightful position, if you like, and someone like Amy, who's the speed demon, or within the law, or me, because we know the road so well, we're probably going to be in pole position by the time you get to the bendy bits. So I agree that that would be one of the priority areas that Cape will.
Sure. Charles, did you want to make any last comment on that one?
On me?
Charles.
Oh.
Look, only to reinforce the issue about the need for regular overtaking lanes on the corridor. I mean, it's an issue that keeps coming up time and time again, and particularly with the variety of vehicles that use that corridor and the challenges of the topography, you do need those regular opportunities for safe overtaking. But you know, more than that, we also need protection between oncoming traffic as well to avoid any head-on crashes and roadside hazard reduction too. So there's a lot of work that needs to happen on that particular stretch of corridor, but certainly the regular placement of good overtaking lanes which are long enough for that safe manoeuvre to occur is really critical.
Thank you, Charles. Look, what I'd like to do to wrap up is actually open up to Dylan Beach and Megan Harvey, our two regional tourism managers, Flerio and KI, and give you each 60 seconds, a minute, to let Amy and Leon know what would be your number one consideration that you'd like them to take on board if they were to come into government. Dylan, I can see you smiling there, so I'm going to put you on the spot first.
That's okay. You guys can hear me, sit down. That's okay. Yeah, thank you. I think we've just run a recent survey for industry operators over the last summer training period. I think the three biggest things, I might do three just quickly. The biggest thing is probably marketing. You know, I think we need to drive demand. We're going to come into a really competitive time and interstate and international borders open up. So marketing dollars to SATC and increasing their marketing budget is probably priority. We talked about you know, training and skills and industry capabilities. You know, as Shaun said, once we need, you know, a lot of the guys are small business owners, but we also need to understand everything from digital marketing all the way through to distribution, because we want them to be visible from an online and a trade perspective, and we also want them to be bookable as well. So that's a big one. And the third one as well is the grants, and you know, most recently the TRDF in Flurio was a huge project. You know, we had about $3 million of investment grants through the region. We would love to see more of that in the Flurio. There's a big pipeline that didn't get that money, and we would love to open that up. But I might still be against thunder a little bit in this as well. But we want to, I guess, make it a little bit more achievable for small businesses. You know, the TRDF was sometimes a little bit unachievable for those small businesses. So we would love to see that mix of that grant and funding as well. So that's probably our three.
Great, thank you. I'll let you get away with three. And we've magically got Megan on the screen now. So what would be your top request?
Thanks, Christina. I would actually like to probably reiterate what Dylan has just said. Marketing is probably one of our biggest drivers, especially through the South Australian Tourism Commission. They do a massive job for the regions, and we really appreciate what they do. And that challenge with international borders opening, we can see a lot of Australians and South Australians exiting Australia maybe quicker than what we would really like them to do. So we really want them to stay in Australia and discover Australia as we want them to. The training is a really interesting one. And on the island, I think one of the main things that I see nearly every day when I walk into a business is I need staff, get me staff, and I want somebody that's trained. And that is a really critical point. Kangaroo Island's got that unique difficulty that we don't have the housing for them. So we can't have the staff until we have the housing. So we have this chicken and an egg problem, which is really a really big challenge for us right now. But you know, the staff issue is across Australia and probably across the world. So what can we do that is going to really achieve that? I agree with the grants, especially small business grants. We've got lots of micro businesses in South Australia. You know, mums and dads, they can't afford to match big dollars. And I think we really need to support business in that way. The one other one that I really wanted to throw in there too was small business support through industry associations, and how can state government support the many industry associations, especially here on the island, that are doing a lot of the big legwork and feeding up to the state government in what the assistance and the help that the island actually needs. So that's probably my 3/4.
Thank you, Megan. Appreciate it. And I hope Amy and Leon, that's given you a lot of food for thought. And we look forward to seeing what happens over the next few weeks. And I'm going to hand back to Emily now to wrap everything up.
Yes, it's basically back to the studio for me to farewell.
That's right.
So thank you so much for taking part in the Why Tourism Matters series. Normally, and particularly, it's heartbreaking, particularly for the Mawson electorate, because of the incredible food, wine, distilling, breweries, etc. Would have been an amazing networking function. So I'm bitterly disappointed that we're not there to share a gin and tonic or similar. So, but we look forward to hopefully having more of these opportunities to come together as well. So thank you for sharing your views, particularly beforehand, because it helps us have a really smooth discussion. Also, our speakers today are happy for you to contact them, so we can share their contact details and also a short survey to get your views of how today went. We'll send that out via email, and of course, as we said, the recording will be available. So thank you for supporting this event. Please share your feedback, and we hope you have a wonderful evening.